Were you living at the time?
At the time, I was living in Palisades Park, New Jersey.
And why did you join the Army?
I joined the Army because I ran out of money for my college education. I was going to New York University at the time, and I owed the university up to the end of my junior year. I already had owed them $400, and they wouldn't give me any more loans to continue my education in my last year. So I had to quit at the end of my junior year, and I thought if I joined the Army, I might be able to get an appointment to West Point. But in any case, it was a way to make a little money. And I was interested in the Army because I had already had 3 years of ROTC at NYU, and I really enjoyed it. So I thought the Army, and the Army engineers especially, which is what I was being trained in at NYU, looked like a possible good career.
Do you recall your first days in the service?
Did I, what?
Do you recall your first days in the service? Where did you go for your training?
Oh, I can recall them because, as I said, I was an enlisted man. And when you enlist in New York, I enlisted in New York City, at downtown, the Wall Street area. And when they took me in the service, they sent me to Fort Slocum in New York. And so Fort Slocum is where they brought the coal in to New York City. So the first part of my career was to get the blue denims on with the heavy boots and go out and work on the coal pile for the Army, loading things. So it was a bad experience. I ended up at the end of the day covered with coal soot, and that was it. So it was not a very good experience, the way to start the Army. But I had enlisted with the idea that I wanted to go for foreign service, so I had signed up for Puerto Rico, and it was just a matter of waiting it out there at Fort Slocum until they shipped me to Puerto Rico.
And what kind of experience did you have in boot camp besides shoveling coal? What other kinds of things did you do?
Being that I was pretty well trained in ROTC for 3 years, that when I got down to Puerto Rico, I was fortunate enough, while we were going through basic training there, that of the recruits, I was probably the most experienced in the military life. So it was fortunate that the captain there took a liking to me, and he assigned me as a lead for the recruits. So I didn't have to get so much dirty work down in Puerto Rico. It was pretty good. I was already in a lead position there. So it worked out pretty good for me.
And where did you go when you left boot camp?
Excuse me.
Where did you go to when you left boot camp?
It was not a boot camp. Actually, I never went to a boot camp. I reported down there to the 27th Combat Engineers, and Captain Walsh was our captain of the company I was in. I was on Company B, 27th Engineers, and he was responsible for putting us through some basic training right there at Fort Buchanan in Puerto Rico. So we really had a nice assignment there because initially Fort Buchanan wasn't ready for us yet. So initially we were actually stationed in El Morro, which is at the entrance to the harbor of San Juan, and our bunks were in the gun emplacements of El Morro. So we were able to hear the splashing waves on the walls of El Morro and beautiful breezes, evening breezes. It was a very pleasant way to start the Army.
And how long were you there?
Actually, my whole service there was only 1 year, but the summers got a little hot at Puerto Rico, so we did get through those. But I was fortunate enough that the captain knew that I was interested in West Point. So when as the war was developing, well, we didn't get into the war yet, but as it was anticipating that we would get involved, they were building up the Army. The Army decided that they needed more officers. So the officer candidate school system was started while I was there. And the captain came to me one day and said, you expressed an interest in West Point. The chances of getting a West Point appointment are pretty slim. So I suggest that these officer candidate schools are becoming available, that if you want to become an officer, you might try to get into those. So I said, okay, where's the application? So we filled out the application, and at that time there were no Corps of Engineers officer candidate schools, so I signed up for the artillery. So it was anticipated that they would make these appointments sometime in the next few months after I signed up, so we waited back, and while I was waiting, they changed over and did set up an officer candidate school in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and they changed my application over to the Corps of Engineers, and I was fortunate that I was one of two selected out of Puerto Rico for the officer candidate school, and actually it's out of 2 out of 100 that were selected overall from the United States for the officer candidate school, the first one. So I was one of 100 that were selected out of the Army at large, and that year I then went to the officer candidate school in June of the following year. In other words, I had enlisted in July. In June, I was off to officer candidate school for the next year.
And how long did that officer's candidate
That was
school
only
go?
3 months. 3 months of very intensive training, and very intensive. It was day and night training at Fort Belvoir, and you talk about boot camp. I think that place was worse than boot camp would ever be. And we finally were able to get commissioned. Out of the 167 of us were commissioned as second lieutenants in September of 1941.
Do you remember any of your instructors from that time?
Pardon me?
Do you remember any of your instructors from the OCR?
I was going to, I thought I had it at the end of my mind, but I won't say that I remember it right now.
No.
I have actually, in the booklet that I prepared of my Army career, I have a picture there of the graduating class, and of a part of the graduating class, because I couldn't, one of these big wide pictures, you know, that extends about 3 feet. I could only capture one part of it, and it shows the officers that were there, but I right offhand now, I don't remember the names of the officers that
That's
trained
okay.
us.
So where did you go after Virginia?
Well, we each had got assignments, and my assignment was to what was called at that time Camp Polk, Louisiana, to the 3rd Armored Division, the 23rd Engineers, 23rd Armored Engineers. So we were off to Louisiana, and there were 4 of us that reported from the school, reported to the 3rd Armored Division. The 3rd Armored Division was just being activated in preparation for the war in Camp Polk, which has since become Fort Polk in Louisiana. And it was a formative phase, each one of us being assigned. I was assigned to what was Company A of the 23rd Engineers, and got indoctrinated there as an officer, and fortunately I grew from there. From there I was, we were building up the Army, and what happened is we were building up the armed forces, especially the armor. The armor was something new for the Army, because we did not have any real Army. The old cavalry units were now becoming armored, the armored divisions. And you've heard about the 1st, and of course you've heard about Patton's 2nd. We were the 3rd Armored Division. These were large divisions. There were 10,000 man divisions. And of course, our battalion of engineers was only 1,000 of the 10,000. And I was in what was called Company A. And what we did is, during this growth stage in Louisiana, actually, we cadreed out. What we did is we doubled up in strength, and then we cadre out the people for other divisions. In other words, we helped form the 4th Armored Division and the 7th Armored Division, which followed us. So this is how the Army grew at that time. And it was an interesting period of time, and of course I grew with it, which was very fortunate. So actually I was promoted to First Lieutenant within 7 months after arriving there, and then 8 months later I was made a captain. So by December 1942, I was already elevated to captain and had command of Company A of the 23rd Armored Engineers at that time. So it was an interesting career. But along this period of time comes our trip then to, as part of our training, the war was being developed in North Africa at that time, and the 3rd Armored Division was being prepared for being sent to North Africa. So we went out to the Mojave Desert, and that was quite an experience. That the entire division went out for training in the Mojave in the summer of 1942 and went through intensive training in the heat of the desert in order to be ready for North Africa. And that was quite a bit of training. At that time, I took command of Company A during that period of time, the transition there. Actually, I took command a little bit before we went to the Mojave. So actually, the company was under my command there, and of course, I remained as a commander till during the war later on, which we'll talk about, where I was wounded. But it was an interesting experience there, working in Mojave. Of course, there were nice weekends in Los Angeles, which were very enjoyable, and that was a good way to relax in a better, more comfortable atmosphere than the desert.
For sure. So when you left the Mojave, where did you go to?
From Mojave, we were supposed to go to North Africa, so we were packed up and sent to Camp Pickett, Virginia, in order to get re-equipped with all nice new equipment, and get on our ships to go over to fight in the North African campaign. But what happened is the war in North Africa went so well for the Allies that they didn't need a lot of this heavy armor. So they decided to send us back to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, and we were in Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania in 1943. So in the end of 42 and 43, we spent, of course, the war broke out, as you know, our participation in December 1942. And at that point, we knew that we would get committed. But they did not need us in North Africa, so we spent all of 1943 and the initial phases of 1942, rest of 1942 and most of 43 in Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, at which point we were there for training and intensive training there, because the nice thing about there was fields in Pennsylvania where we could actually maneuver with our big tanks and everything. So, and for the engineers, we could build our bridges and anything we wanted. So there was plenty of land there, and that's where we did quite a bit of training. Getting ready. In fact, I was probably in my best physical condition of my entire life at the end of that year at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. But then they decided that we get ready to go to war, and that we were engaged in the war, of course, very heavily by that time. But for us, it was a matter of being further prepared for the invasion into Europe, which we then were sent to England. And I'm trying to remember the exact date there. I think it's, yes, September 1943. We were sent to, well, actually we arrived, yes, September 1943. We were sent to England and for further training
And what
while
were
we
you
waited
training
for
in?
the invasion, for Eisenhower to decide we could invade France. So we did not get involved in the Italian invasion. I was primarily our division was stationed in England for almost a whole year. So we lounged in the plains of Salisbury Plains of southern England very nicely for almost a year. Actually, we were on some of the very fine estates of the English lords. They put our Quonset huts right on their estates, and we enjoyed life in British estate country. So it was not a bad life.
Did you get to visit with the owners of those estates while you were there?
Well, the bonus, as officers, we were sometimes invited to the English teas. So we did get to do that. But the best enjoyment we had was I'm trying to remember what we called them, but the ladies of England in Salisbury, which was a city near us, where you may have heard of Salisbury Cathedral and so forth. But the ladies would have the dance parties for us on Saturday nights, and we'd go to Salisbury and enjoy a few beers and so forth, and dancing with the young English ladies. So, but besides that, we always the lords and the estates there would invite us to tea once in a while. So it was not a bad life, I will say, while we were waiting to go into combat.
And where did you go from England then?
So I got to know the English people quite well. And we were near a small town that we could walk into. It was very nice, little town of Tisbury. And we enjoyed that very much.
You were away from the areas that were being bombed in England?
No, I wouldn't say that. We every once in a while, in fact, I can enumerate one time I had to leave in London one time, but what we would do is we'd hear the V1s going overhead, and as long as we could hear them going overhead, and going overhead you could hear them, that meant that they weren't going to land and bomb us. So there was a very good feeling that you could hear them. If you didn't hear them, then the next thing you would hear would be the explosion, and that would be dangerous. So we were not directly bombed because we were in a small town quite a ways from London, but of course London was being pretty hard hit, and one time I took leave in London and spent a couple of days there on leave, and while I was in London, I was in my hotel room, and you could hear the V1s and V2s would come over and bomb London, and the sirens would go off, of course, to go to bomb shelters, and I was comfortable in my room, and I thought about it, but I heard about people trying to run out to go to the bomb shelters and getting killed on their way to the bomb shelter from the hotels. So I decided myself that I'd stay in my hotel room in my comfort and forget about the bomb shelters. So any bombing I encountered in London, I stayed in the hotel room. I didn't bother trying to go to bomb shelters.
And when you left England, where did you go next?
Next was the invasion. So, as you know, on June 6, 1944, the Allied troops invaded through France. And we were not called right away for the invasion because we're heavy armor. They had to form a beachhead. So the infantry, the paratroopers and so forth formed the beachhead. The beachhead had been established about 10 miles deep when they decided we could come in. So that was on B+17, that was 17 days after, on June 23rd. We were loaded on LSTs and crossed the channel and beached ourselves and went on the beaches in Normandy. And we landed in Omaha Beach. But, and we went up the beach. It was not that bad. Again, the beachhead was deep enough. All we had to worry about is Germans strafing us once in a while at night. But we tried to get our equipment cleaned up because, of course, it had all been waterproofed, all of our equipment, to come off the LSTs and get it all prepared for future combat. And we were in the beachhead for a while and got ourselves established. There were excitement there, every once in a while bombing, gas scares and things like that, but it was not bad, too bad. But they prepared us, and very shortly after that we did enter into our first combat. And that's where this was hedgerow country. And people, when you say hedgerows, sometimes don't understand what hedgerows. What it is Normandy area. The farmers there all had their little plots, which were surrounded by hedgerows. But what happened is, over the I guess centuries that some of these people had these farms, that the ground they were cultivating, of course, they took with their vegetables and so forth, they took some dirt out. So as a result, these hedgerows were 6 feet or more high on each side, and they're not just hedges, they were the earthen foundations of the hedges. So these were more than 6 feet high, and they surrounded each one of the small farms. And we tried to penetrate now. Remember, we were only a 10-mile beachhead, so we had to try to break out. So we did, while I was there, our initial deal was to try to make a field of penetrations, if you want to call it. So my first encounter in battle with my company was about 2 weeks after we landed. We got into battle, and we tried to take 25-pound TNT boxes, put them on the hedgerows, and with a short fuse, try to blow the hedgerow through so we could break through with our tanks. Remember, tanks couldn't penetrate these hedgerows. So we tried that, and this experience was, unfortunately, in the first battle, out of my 200-man company, we lost 10% of it, and there was either wounded or killed. So I ended up having to replenish my troops, and then we decided that was not a good way. So our mechanics came up with a good idea that we could mount dozer blades, like bulldozer blades, at the front of our tanks, and penetrate the hedgerows by bulldozing our way through. So that's when I got involved a little bit in that they assigned 6 of these bulldozer tanks to me, to my company, and we decided to go ahead and try to penetrate some of these. And this was the second battle I got involved in. In that one, thank God, I was able to keep these tanks with the bulldozers moving and knocking away so our troops could go through. We made a slight penetration. Now remember, this is not the penetration which occurred later on, which was a St. Lo breakthrough. This was just trying to really push the Germans away from getting a little more beachhead, a little more room to maneuver. And I was fortunate enough that I guess one of my commanders liked what I was doing there with the tanks, and as a result of that, I got a Bronze Star Medal for my actions during the gunfire and so forth, maneuvering these tanks and getting these hedgerows knocked out. But that was the first time I got a Bronze Star Medal. And it was a nice award to get. Made me feel a little better that I was doing something the right way. But right after that, we did finally, arrangements were made, and Eisenhower and got the Air Force and so forth to prepare for what they call the St. Lo breakthrough. In other words, one of the things you got to do is break out of these bridgeheads. So what was arranged was one day, I guess it was in July, that it was decided, I think it's around the middle of July, to conduct a heavy bombing of the German occupied areas in Normandy. So what they did is they took a 3-mile deep by 7-mile wide stretch of earth there, and actually had the bombers come in, and there were 3,000 bombers during a few hours in the morning that actually saturated this 3-mile or 7-mile area with bombs. And we were, of course, waiting to penetrate through with our armor, because that's the reason we eventually became the Spearhead Division, because our job was to spearhead and go through the German lines first. And we were waiting right near this 3-mile by 7-mile area, and the saturation bombing was so heavy that I recall getting a headache from the noise of the bombs exploding. But we, thank God, it was over with, and when we went penetrate through, there's nothing living there. So we were able to more or less just drive through, but the holes were so bad that actually as we penetrated through, my command jeep that I was riding got stuck in one of these bomb craters, and I had abandoned the jeep and commandeered another one of my jeeps from my company. My company had 10 jeeps assigned to it, so I commandeered one other one as a command vehicle and abandoned the one I had, but to go on through, and we got through St. Lo quite well. In fact, we penetrated quite well to where we were 20 miles, what I call 20 miles behind the enemy lines. Then this is where my next adventure was, that we had penetrated the German lines, and we felt pretty secure, but the way we were, a company of engineers consists of 3 platoons and a headquarters platoon. Of course, I'm being the commander, I was the headquarters platoon. But my platoons, which were commanded by lieutenants, were assigned to what we call combat command units. Those are forward echelons of tanks and infantry to support them and give them the engineering support they needed. So one of my platoons was quite well forward, as I say, 20 miles behind the lines. I was not the kind of commander who liked to stand back in headquarters, so I went up to see how my forward platoon was doing, and checked with them what equipment they might need so I could send it up to them from headquarters and see if they had encountered any problems, needed any other support. But I got caught at night coming on, and here we're pretty well into the enemy lines. I decided it wouldn't be too safe to drive back at night with my Jeep. So I waited, I slept to the front lines that night, and the next morning, you know, when I say sleep, all you do is lie down next to your vehicle and sleep. That's how you slept. And the next morning, decided to have my Jeep, a Jeep driver, it happened to be one of my lieutenant's Jeeps, not mine, that I commandeered him and the lieutenant to drive me back to my headquarters. But on the way back, we made the mistake of doing something that I was teaching my troops never drive around a corner without looking around the corner first when you're in combat. And we were coming down this road and wheeled around a corner on the way back to headquarters, and unfortunately a Mark IV tank was waiting for us, German tank. So as we came around the corner, he decided to fire his 75 millimeter cannon at us, and his armor-piercing shell he had in the cannon penetrated the front of my Jeep and killed my driver. The driver cut him in half, actually, and I was sitting next to him, and the lieutenant was sitting behind. We didn't think we were hit. We jumped into this is still hedgerow country. We jumped into the base of the hedgerows in a ditch, a deep ditch. The ditches, by the way, they are, a couple of feet deep. They're not where you can hide yourself in them. The Mark IV tank was continued to machine gun us on top of the hedgerow. You could see the hedgerow on top of us being machine gunned. And we had only rifles we were carrying. We didn't bother with our pistols. We carried rifles in combat. We didn't trust pistols, the .45 caliber pistol. So I fired a few rounds with my rifle, and then I realized that was an armored tank over there. And what is a rifle going to do? A rifle isn't going to do anything. So we decided. And the tank commander was yelling, "Handy Hawk, hands up." So the lieutenant, he's in the ditch behind me. He yells, "What do we do now?" And I said, "You hear the man. All you can do is hands up." So we lifted our hands up and walked out of the ditch, and thank God he didn't keep machine gunning us. But when we got up to where he jumped out of his turret, which made us feel a little safer, and he approached us. As he approached us, I collapsed. I didn't realize it, but at that time, I had 16 holes in the side of my body from shrapnel, that's as a result of the armor-piercing shell. And he saw us collapse and told us to get over on the side, and we were put on the side to wait to be recouped by the German medics. So that experience there, because of the mistake we made driving around the corner, we ended up being prisoners of the Germans. But since both of us were wounded, we were put on actually they didn't have an ambulance. All they did was put us in the back of a pickup truck and shipped us back to a field hospital. And the two of us were taken back to a German field hospital, which was a few miles back, and immediately operated on. But on the way to the field hospital, we had a little adventure, which I always laugh at, because the lieutenant that I had with me turned to me while we were in the back of the pickup truck and said, "What? I got these field notes." What we did, by the way, whenever we were preparing for a campaign or something, we'd be called in by the commanding officer and given instructions of where we're going to go and what we're going to do. So we used to take these down as field notes on pieces of paper and use these as our notes to know where we're going and what we're supposed to be doing. And he still had his field notes. I, fortunately, had realized while we were waiting for the pickup truck to come pick us up, and we were sitting in a field because, of course, we couldn't stand. I dug a little hole in the ground in the field next to me and took my field notes and buried them in the field. But he still had his field notes with him, and we knew if the Germans got a hold of these field notes, there's a good chance they would use those notes to bomb our people, because they would tell them where our positions were. So he said to me, my lieutenant said to me, what do I do now with these? So I turned to him and said, you know the instructions, eat them. So he politely took the field notes and ate them while we were in the back, while the Germans couldn't see what we were doing. And that way we actually didn't endanger anybody. But we were taken to a field hospital. The Germans treated us very well. Immediately they injected me with tetanus antitoxin in order for me not to get any tetanus. And they operated on me. They removed all the fragments except two. Two of the fragments, one on my left chest and one on my left thigh, were left in my body, and they're still here now. And from there on, we went, well, I don't know, after the operation, I never saw my lieutenant again. I don't know where he went from the field hospital, but I assumed he was operated on at the field hospital. I never saw him again. I was at another hospital temporarily, and eventually ended up in Paris at a hospital the Germans had taken over in Paris. And at that hospital, we were, that was up to that time, I was right with Germans. In other words, they didn't try to separate us, even though I was supposedly captured since I was wounded and they knew I couldn't escape or anything. I was treated right along with the Germans. In other words, the Germans treated me very well. I can say there was no problem in being how I was treated. I was in bed right next to Germans for a while, till we got to Paris. In Paris, they separated us. The fellows that were prisoners, and by the way, there were prisoners in this hospital from all different parts of the service. In fact, there were some Canadians, there were some prisoners from Algeria, the French Algerians from Algeria, of course, were part of the Allied service, and they were captured too, and in the hospital, wounded, captured like I was. So we were in a separate ward there in this hospital in Paris, which was a French hospital which had been taken over by the Germans. And we were there for a while and stayed there. Then more adventures after that. But anyway, there we were treated and bandages changed and cleaned up for a while. But then the Germans, then our Allied troops, thank God, were still moving ahead quite well. They didn't need me to help them advance, it looks like. They advanced without me. So they were on their way to Paris and beyond. And we were there, of course these events are in July. Well, August 2nd is when this misadventure rather occurred. When I was captured was on August 2nd. And during the month of August, the Allied troops advanced through France. And their advance was quite well, to where they were on their way to Paris and arriving in mid-August. They were already on the outskirts of Paris, and we could see that the Germans were being in a hospital there. We saw them trying to make preparations to evacuate, to get out of Paris, get out of the way of the Allied troops. And so what happened then is that in getting out of there, here they had a bunch of us Allied prisoners. What to do with us, they had to get us out of there. So what they did is they took us down to about 100 of us, down to the railroad yard, and put us in the old 40 and 8s, which is World War I remembrances, where it was 40 men or 8 horses in these boxcars. And they put us in a couple of boxcars and were going to evacuate us as soon as they can get a train to pull us out and take us to Germany, to some prisoner of war camp, I guess, as we recovered. But most of us were not completely ambulatory. For instance, I could not walk very well at that point still because of my leg wounds. So, and there were others in the same condition. While we're in the railroad yard, the Germans, all they had for guards there were some, I guess, retired soldiers who had been recalled to duty because these were old men, old German army, and during the day, the French Red Cross would come around with food for us and things like that to feed us and help us. And some of the wounds that needed care, they would take care of those for us. But the Germans did nothing except have these guards there. But at the same time, while we're there in the railroad yard, the American, Allied troops, I should say, I shouldn't call it just American, Allied troops did not want the Germans to escape on the railroads. So every night, they would lock us up in our boxcars because they're afraid we'd escape somehow in the dark. So they put us, as I say, 40 in the boxcar, locked the doors while the guards were outside. But the American Air Force was actively bombing these railroad yards. So I realized that really after the first night. So the next day, I ended up being, of the 100 there, I ended up being the senior officer somehow. I don't know why. Of all the also wounded, I happened to be the senior officer. There were other officers in there, but I happened to be the only captain, and I outranked by date of service as an officer all the other the couple of other captains that were there. So it so happens in the military deal, whoever the ranking man takes command. So I took charge of the group and I told the guards in my sign language, I didn't know any German, that we needed red crosses on top of our boxcars. So they finally got us some red paint, and they said, here's the red paint. Well, we're not getting you on top of the boxcars. So somehow I found a couple of guys that were ambulatory enough to get up on top of the boxcars and paint the red crosses for us on top of the boxcars, so the Allied aircraft would no longer bomb us while we're there. We were there a few days, and I say we're being all taken care of by the Red Cross. But then they started to try to move us out of there. I realized that, so I signaled to the Red Cross that be sure to get a word to the underground that we should not leave this yard, because once we left this yard, we were on our way to Germany, and God knows what would happen to us once we got into Germany. So they were good enough to get the Red Cross the message over to the underground people who were the French underground was very active in shooting up trains. So what they would do is they shot up our trains whenever they hooked us up to a train at night, and we started to move. We'd move a few yards, and the next thing I know, there was bang, and they left us. And the Germans quit trying. Eventually, they tried several nights to get us out of there. They decided they couldn't, so they abandoned us. And what they did the next day, one day, the last day, I remember, of the 100, they decided about 25 of them or so were ambulatory enough they could march them out of the yard. So the Germans, with the guards, marched out of the yard, abandoned the rest of us. So about 60 to 70 of us were abandoned in the underground. Of course, the French underground immediately took us under care, and the French Red Cross, and took us off to a French hospital, which we're in Paris now in a French hospital, no longer occupied by French doctors and French nurses, which was a very pleasant experience, finishing up the time till the Americans came in to rescue us. Unfortunately, at that point, I wasn't interested in being rescued. We had nice French nurses around. Remember, I'm a bachelor, I'm not married. And it was very pleasant being there. even though I was wounded, did feel very comfortable with my wounds, but the French nurses made it very comfortable for us. And we were there for a few days till, of course, toward the end of August. I think if I remember the dates, around August 25th or so, the Americans, well, actually, the Americans got into Paris about that time, and they came into the hospital. And after they checked us all out, they evacuated each of us to wherever we were to go. Some were, of course, French, Algerians, as I said. Some were Canadians. They were sent back to the Canadian Army. And I was one of the last to leave the hospital. But they immediately flew me back to England. And I spent some more time at hospitals in England. And where the American doctors took me over. These were American hospitals in England that the Americans occupied in England, the field hospitals in England run by the Americans. And in fact, one of them tried to operate on me again to fix, he didn't like the way my wounds looked. So he operated on me, he made them worse actually. I ended up with bigger scars because of the Germans had done a better job than the Americans did, I hate to say it, on my wounds. But we were there in England. But while I was there in the hospital, I had indicated I wanted to get back to the front, back to my outfit. But in the meantime, we went to a rehab center where we were actually put on a nice British estate, and very comfortable estate. Unfortunately, I don't ride horses and things like that, but I could have done that if I did. And but we'd enjoy tea with the lady of the house. And but then I had insisted that I wanted to go back to my outfit, so I was shipped back into Europe, flown back into Europe to Aachen, where I rejoined my outfit in Aachen, Germany. And I did get assigned back to the 3rd Armored Division and the 23rd Engineer Battalion. So I did get my assignment back, but of course my company was already taken over by one of my lieutenants. I couldn't really go back in there and tell my lieutenant, get out, I'm taking back over. You don't do that. So I was then assigned as battalion for the 23rd Armored Engineer Battalion. I was assigned as initially as battalion intelligence officer, and then promoted up to battalion operations officer. But the next adventure is a further adventure. Do I go on?
Absolutely. It's wonderful.
Well, the next adventure was, we were in Aachen, Germany. We're in a rest area. I rejoined them outside of Aachen. And of course, the battle, the Germans tried to push the Allied troops back to the sea through Belgium. Many of you remember the Battle of the Bulge. Well, it was decided that the 3rd Armored Division should go into Belgium and push the Germans back. So we were taken around into Belgium and started fighting the Germans to push them back. Of course, there was another adventure that we encountered in that case. Now remember, I'm no longer in a frontline position. I'm at headquarters staff, the operations officer for the battalion. So you're back in headquarters, and we were at the time, although our troops were all fighting, we're supporting them. And we're sitting in headquarters in Houten in Belgium when the Germans were able to penetrate enough to where they came into Houghton, and our headquarters troops, I gotta say this, were very brave. And remember, all our headquarters people are armed just like frontline people. They don't just sit at offices or desks and things like that. So our headquarters people, we started battling this invading German army that we were able to push them back enough to where we were able to save it. But while we were there in Houghton, we saw the furors of the war as far as the Bulge was concerned. I saw fresh troops being brought in, Allied troops being brought in, sent to fight them, and then being come back about half the men that went forward. You know, this is how bad the fighting was, and it was very cold winter. It was the coldest winter I'd ever spent. And my ID at the time shows my picture of me because I lost my ID in these campaigns there. But anyway, we were able to push the Germans back and stop that invasion and go forward. So it was not bad. And go forward through Germany.
And what does an operations officer do? What role do you play during
Well,
that?
the operations officer is responsible as operations officer to be sure that the assignments of the frontline companies of the engineers were proper to each one of the combat units. And I was responsible for that. Plus, as we penetrated through at different times, we'd be assigned some of the support troops, support bridge groups and so forth, to build bridges and things like that. So my responsibility was to be sure that they did the job that they were assigned to do with us and get it done. In order, again, we're the engineers that support the armor. So any assigned engineer groups, we had to see that they did the job that supported the armor so the armor could advance. Our big job was to advance as fast as we could. In fact, and our advance through Germany was so far that at one point we were 100 miles beyond our support troops. In other words, although we were advancing, the front lines were 100 miles into Germany while the supports were still coming up behind them with the support trains. Our supply trains was worse. Our immediate support, the front line support, which I was with, of course, was up pretty well forward with the others. But our supply trains, which supplied the ammunition and supplies and all that, was 100 miles behind us, trying to catch up to us and bring us the gun supplies. At one time, I was told that some of our weapons only had about 5 rounds of ammunition left in them. I'm talking about the cannons and stuff like that, on the tanks. So we were running pretty low as we were going through Germany, and we got within 60 miles of Berlin by the April of 1945. We were within 60 miles of Berlin, and we were waiting for. We were told to hold our positions and so forth because we didn't know at the time why we weren't allowed to keep going and take over Berlin, but we were waiting for the Russians to get into Berlin before we did. That was agreed on by our president. So at that point, this is the next major adventure in my life, was I had a bridge company assigned to me to build a bridge, Ponton Bridge, which is the floating bridges over the Mulde River, which was, as I say, about 60 miles outside of Berlin. And as we were trying to get this bridge built, the Germans, with their artillery, were constantly bombing us. In other words, they're shelling us and knocking the bridge out. And 2 or 3 times that we thought we had the bridge finished, they knocked it out and we rebuilt it. Now this one last time, we thought we had the bridge finished, the approaches finished. It's not only building the bridge, but you have to build the approaches because tanks need a road to go on. They're not really the best cross-country vehicles. They are. So they need a cleared area to go through, preferably. So we were building these approaches to the bridge so they'd get to the bridge and cross over and get on the other side. And we had this is around April 17th, my notes say, on April 17th, we had finished the bridge, had finished the approaches. The bridge company I had assigned to me as operations officer, and they came to me, and I went down to the bridge to try to inspect it, to make sure, because I had to do, my job was to say the bridge was okay for the 3rd Armored Division tanks to cross. In other words, until they got my okay, they were not allowed to cross the bridge. So I went down to check the bridge and the approaches, and while I was there at the bridgehead checking things, the Germans had shelled us again with some high explosive shells. Now high explosive shells don't wait to hit the ground to explode. They explode in the air above you. So what happened is, I happened to be there when one of these exploded over my head, and I ducked down, as you do, you try to take cover. I thought I took cover and I was all right, but when I tried to get up, I realized that my arm wasn't coming up with me, that something was wrong. And when I was went back to my headquarters area, I reached up in my helmet, I realized it was bleeding, my arm was hanging by my side, and I realized I'd been hit. The medics were called, and they decided that I had a head injury, and head injuries they didn't try to treat in the field. They immediately put me in an airplane and sent me back to England. So I flew back to England. Now remember, this is only a month, not even a month before the war was over with Germany. The war ended in May, if I remember right, May 5th or something like that is the date I recall for the European theater. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I was all the way back in England by then. So I celebrated the recovery in England. But at that point, I was put in a hospital in England, again by a very excellent neurosurgeon, American neurosurgeon, operated on me and removed part of my skull, which had been damaged. The shell fragment had gone through my helmet, penetrated my helmet, but it didn't penetrate my skull. It bounced off my skull, but it dented my skull and damaged my brain slightly. So the neurosurgeon had to remove part of my skull, which I now still have a hole in my head, and remove part of my brain actually, which was damaged. And I was able to recover from this, and eventually, with my own, by the way, we didn't go through therapy, like they tell you to do. I did my own therapy, exercised my arm and hand, and recovered most of the use of my hand. So far, I still have some sensory loss, even to this day. But I did recover almost completely. And but from there, I, of course, could not go back to the outfit. They sent me back to the United States, and I went to a hospital in Atlantic City, New Jersey, which were 2 hotels taken over by Thomas England Hospital. Army Hospital was really a hotel. But so I occupied a hotel room there for a while till they said that I had finally recovered. They offered to put a crown on my head, but I refused to go through another 3 months of hospitalization. So they said, well, what they said in any case, that the injuries I had were such that I could no longer serve in the military. So although at that point I was anxious to continue my military career, and I had made arrangements with a couple of the generals that I served under to recommend me for a permanent appointment as an officer, but the Army said they didn't want a guy with a hole in his head. So, want me to continue?
Sure.
But a little backtracking here on our story, because I realize now that I did not talk a little bit about the implications to the family of the time that I served as a prisoner, because that is rather critical period of time. So I'm going back now to what happened after I was captured and hospitalized. That at that point I was missing in action as reported by the military. Of course, they don't report it right away. The report usually follows, although as August the 2nd, 1944, the actual notice to my sister is later, and we have a telegram of that. But in fact, the nice part about it was that the notice to her actually that I was missing in action, and I was not a good communicator. In other words, I didn't write home every day or every week even. Maybe a month might go by before I wrote home. My sister, by the way, is who I live with. My parents are were no longer living. Well, my father was, but he was not with us. I was living with my sister. So, therefore, she did not know that I was missing in action, except when it finally appeared in the papers and things like that, and she was notified by the War Department that I was missing in action. It's very fortunate that actually about the time she was notified, I had already been rescued and had been able, through the Red Cross, to get information to her that I was okay. So I think it was one day later. You know, she was notified that I was missing in action, and she was notified one day later that I was okay, that I was in the U.S. hospital's hands, that I had already been rescued. So this is how that adventure happened. So, and of course, I've gone through my recovery there. My recovery the second time, of course, I did contact her when I got to England and so forth. Somehow, I guess I must have contacted her from England, but later on, through the Red Cross probably, that was our easiest way to get to home. And then when I was in the Thomas England Hospital, I did call home and contact home. But I was there for, I guess, must have been close to a month at England Hospital while they went through a whole bunch of tests. But these tests didn't really say anything except that you got a hole in your head, and it could be it could put a plate on it. But I definitely what would happen if they put a plate on? I'd be hospitalized for another 3 months, and that wasn't something I wanted. So I said, "What's the danger then?" Well, it says as long as no sharp instrument hits the hole in your head, you're okay. If a sharp instrument goes through that hole in your head, you're dead. So I said, well, that's fine. I'll try to avoid any sharp instruments hitting my head. But that's how we left it. But at the same time, there was a review board that had to convene to decide what to do with Chris Brous. Here he's still in the Army, and what to do with him. Could he go back to active duty or what? Well, the review board was advised by my doctor that I would be subject to epileptic fits because of the head injury, that the Army regulations ruled that anybody with a head injury of my type had to be given a disability retirement. So I was the review board, I appeared before them, and I remember walking into that room, sitting there with my doctor, and the review board looked at me, and they said, what exactly is wrong with that officer? And the doctor had to explain to him what was wrong with me because apparently I looked pretty good at the time. So, but they met a bunch of doctors at the review board. They said, no, he's out of the Army. So any Army career or idea I had was shot dead. And I decided that I better get back to college and finish my last year. So my ambition was to get out of the Army as fast as I could. But because I had 100 days accrued leave, even though they got me out at the hospital there, I was sent home still in the Army up till October 20th. And I wanted to get back to school, so I went back to school in September at NYU. Enrolled in school to continue, finish my last year of college. And I was in the Army, really, officials. But of course, the nice part was, at this point, I was getting retirement pay, which wasn't bad, disability retirement. And of course, the GI Bill had come in real strong at that time, and the GI Bill picked up all my tuition and my books because I was disability retired. So this is even better than just a regular GI Bill. You get the disability one. So I was very grateful to the U.S. government to subsidize my last year of college completely. So the money I'd saved up during my Army career of about $5,000, I didn't have to touch any of that because they paid it. The only mistake I made, I went and finished my college career, graduated in 1946, in June of 46, with a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering degree. But the thing I made a mistake. Since I had this nice GI Bill, I should have gone on and gotten a graduate degree. But I was too anxious to get to work. So I started looking for jobs, and frankly, in 1946, college graduate trying to find a job was, you went to places, unless you'd worked there before, they were waiting for the veterans to come back and be reinstated in their jobs. So there really weren't that many jobs available, contrary to what people think. That the immediate thing for these veterans, that they had to take the veterans and get them back in their jobs. So there were a lot of veterans coming out now. I realized I'd spent from 45 to 46, that year after I got out early. So the rest of the Army guys were all getting out about 46. See, most of them didn't get released completely till the end of 45, 46 to get back to work. So these companies all were waiting for their engineers that had gone to service, come back and be reinstated in their jobs. So they would say, you're well qualified, there's a great job for you, but sorry, we got to wait for the veterans to come back. So I'm not a veteran from the workforce. Remember, I'd gone right from school into the Army. So I had to hunt around, and thank God I had some good recommendations from my profs, and I finally found the kind of job I wanted. Don't get me wrong, I was offered a job by General Electric and things like that, but these are jobs where you go into a student training program at the company. And remember, I'm in my mid-20s now. I don't feel like I'm a kid right out of college that I got to go through a training program. I want to go to work. So I finally found a company in Western Pennsylvania, the Elliott Company, that would hire me in their research and development department as an engineer and not have to go through a training program. So I went to work for them on land-based gas turbines for ship-boat propulsion and locomotive propulsion. Remember again here, that toward the end of the war, the jet propulsion came in, jet aircraft came in, the military jet aircraft, and that the jet engine which is really a gas turbine engine, was very popular. But this was for aircraft. But now there was a lot of interest in using these gas turbines for ship propulsion. The Navy was interested in that, and the railroad people were interested in using gas turbines. So therefore, it seemed like a growing industry to me. So I wanted to get into something new that would contribute to the world. You know, ambitious young guys. And I was fortunate to find a company that thought that way. And this was something new for them, too. So I was in a new research and development department and was successful there with them, did some development work with them. But then the atomic energy industry, nuclear industry, was growing. The interest as a result of the bomb being civilian use. So, and Rickover was pushing the Navy to put nuclear reactors in the submarines. And the big program was being developed there, and one of the lead outfits for that was the Argonne National Laboratory outside of Chicago, in Joliet, Chicago. And I guess I'd made enough friends in the industry already in my first few years that I then was asked by one of my friends who'd gone on and gone to Argonne National Laboratory, would I be interested in coming there and working in Chicago on this new nuclear field for nuclear reactors, which I knew nothing about at the time, of course. And it sounded interesting and challenging, and thank God my wife Elsie was kind enough to go along with my ideas. And of course we had a little girl that was born in there after our marriage, and we decided to go to Chicago and take this job.
Now, in your
But
military
this
career,
is now at the early 50s. So
in your military career, did you make any real close friends that you stayed in touch
No.
with after?
no, I didn't. It's amazing that I did not, because of the way I came out of the service, I think. See, remember, I came out through a hospital system. I didn't come in through the regular hoopla of we won and great parties and so forth and things like that. I came out through a hospital system, and I was separated from all my associates in the military. So actually, I did not care to join any of the military associations. I was more interested. I said, my military career is done. They don't want me in the military. I'm through with the military. I'm going to pursue this engineering career now. So immediately I decided that I've got to concentrate on my engineering career. So all my concentration was there, and except for being a member of the Military Engineers, Society of American Military Engineers, that's the only thing that I did maintain. I maintained a subscription to their magazine to this day, but the other one, the Military Officers Association, actually, I have not maintained any. I did not join any of these the groups that march on Memorial Day and things like that.
Did you go to any of the reunions of the Spearhead group or anything like that?
Pardon?
You didn't go to any of the reunions of the...
Well, this is where, I guess we go to that story now.
Okay.
All right. What happened there is the 3rd Armored Division, I did not know it. After the war, the 3rd Armored Division, remember, they all went to Germany, some of them, and ended up being released out of Germany. As still part of the 3rd Armored Division, they came back to the States, and a few years after the war, they formed the 3rd Armored Division, 3rd Armored Division Association. And they were holding annual meetings. I knew nothing about these annual meetings. Nobody had ever contacted me because, as I said, I lost contact with everybody. So many years later, I guess 10, 50 years, I can't remember how many years later, I was contacted by one of my drivers, believe it or not, my Jeep drivers, peeps we call them, by the way, drivers, happened to find in fact, my children had already been married, by the way, by the time I'm talking about. So they had looked around for Brous, this one fellow who was in the association. He was trying to recruit more people for the association. So he somehow found a phone number for Brous in New Jersey, and it happened to be my son's address at the time. And he talked to my daughter-in-law at that time and said, do you know Brous? She says, I do. He's my father-in-law. So they got the contact that way and contacted me and asked me if I would be interested. They were having the association meeting. Would I be interested in coming to, and I forget what city I was in at the time. So I said, gee, that sounds great. I didn't know it existed. So based on that, I did go to an association meeting and did join the association at that time. So, and I did go to about 3 of their annual meetings, but I found as we all got older, and that's one of the things that happens to us old folks, I guess, old veterans. We get older, and even the associations, you get tired of going to the association and find out who died last year.
Yes.
I mean, that's not a very pleasant thing. So, I mean, you like to live, not die. So, I frankly have not, well, the association this year had its last meeting, in fact. So, there is still a 3rd Armored Division Association, but it's the 3rd Armored Division that was reactivated for the current wars. So, it's not the World War II Association, really. The World War II people have now decided that they did not want to completely join up with them, but we still have a website which is maintained for both the current association, which is the younger guys, and the World War II guys, which there's not too many of us left anymore, that we're not holding annual meetings anymore. This was the last one this year. So I did not go to this last one. As I say, a couple of years back, I decided I couldn't take it anymore, finding out about who died. So that's my association.
Can you tell us what medals you won?
Well, the medals, I guess the meaningful medals, are the ones that I received actually in the Normandy area. The first one being the Bronze Star Medal for my leading these tanks with the tank dozers around in the battlefield. They thought I was rather brave to be shuffling them around in my Jeep while the Germans were shooting at us. I guess I was a pretty stupid young guy, but I was doing that. But they gave me a medal for it, so I guess I got something good for it. The second one, I really didn't know I had gotten, because I didn't know anybody knew about me missing in action or cared about it. But it so happened, when I was wounded there and missing in action, somehow they thought my bravery in going up and trying to support my frontline troops and so forth was deserving of a medal. So I got a second Bronze Star. So I have 2 Bronze Star medals for those 2 occasions. And the citations, I have them here, but I'm not going to try to read them to you now. They're existing. But they make you feel good. They sound pretty good. Then, of course, the Purple Heart on the August 2nd, where I was wounded by the German tank, that deserved a Purple Heart. And then the second time was when outside of Germany when we were building the bridge when I was wounded. That's the one that finally got me out of the service. That's the Purple Heart. And of course, I have a medal which is called Prisoner of War Medal, which is awarded to prisoners of war. I have a campaign medal which has a silver star, which is the equivalent of 5 bronze stars on the campaign for the European theater, which is European and North Africa. In other words, all those campaigns we served during World War II. It's a World War II medal which says that I served in 5 campaigns through Germany, through France, Belgium, and Germany. The others are American Defense Medal, Good Conduct Medal, and I don't know, those types. There's about 4 of them really are more campaign medals than any particular service. The most meaningful one are the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and I feel the 5 campaigns and the Prisoner of War. Those are 4 that I consider. There's the other ones that are 3 others that are American Defense Medal, and because they feel we helped defend the United States and so forth. And those exist. And I've been able to, I did not physically receive too many of these because of my injuries. These have been sent to me by the War Department since I retired, actually. So I have the medals now. And a roll of medals there, which I never got to wear. So anyway.
Is there anything else you'd like to add while we're still on this interview about any aspect of your military career?
In my service, I think, frankly, I think this, I don't recommend anybody go to war because they like the idea of going to war. I don't think it's a great idea. I don't believe in war. But also, I feel very pleased the service I have helped me develop myself quite a bit, and I feel very honored with the awards and honors I've received, and such as the honor I'm receiving right now by your interviewing me. I feel very honored to have this presentation to you, and it makes me feel good that at least I did something worthwhile in somebody's mind. So that's a good part about it. But it's interesting that these things we did in the past are being recognized now by people, and I feel good about it. Very fine.
Well, we're very honored that you served and that we have an opportunity to talk to you about your service.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Okay.
Okay.